Okay, so today we'll be talking about multiplication properties of exponents. Before we get into that, though, we need to talk about simplifying exponential expressions. In order for an expression to be in simplest form, there can be no negative exponents. Each base is going to appear only once. There's no powers, products, or quotients raised to powers, and all fractions are reduced. So I'm going to give some examples of what I mean by that. Some examples of what's simplified and what is not simplified. So for instance, okay, so for example, if I have a to the negative 2, b, a. That one is not in simplest form because I have a negative exponent and the base a is appearing twice. So in simplified form, it would end up just being b over a. And I'll explain how we get from not simplified to simplified in a second, but I just want you to understand what it looks like first. If I have x times x squared, it's not simplified because the base x is there twice. X cubed, however, is simplified because the base x is only there once. If I have z cubed inside parentheses and then outside of that I'm raising it to the power of 4, that means I'm taking a power to a power. It's not simplified all the way. So you'd have to simplify it. It would be z to the 12th. Would be z to the 12th. Also, if you have a product that's being raised to a power, for instance, if I have a times b in parentheses and that's being raised to the 4th power, that's a product being raised to the power, so that's not simplified. The a to the 4th, b to the 4th is simplified because there's no product being raised to a power, it's just two bases being raised to powers being multiplied together. And if I have a quotient being raised to a power, like x over y, being raised to the 5th power, that's not simplified because I have a quotient to a power. X to the 5th over the y to the 5th would be the simplified form. And again, I'll explain how you get there. I just want to make sure you guys understand the differences. And then finally, if I have something like 10a squared over 4b. My fraction isn't reduced. 10 over 4 can be reduced, right? Because 2 goes into both of them. And so it would be 5a squared over 2b. All right, so all those things have to be taken care of in order for it to be simplified. No negative exponents, each base appears only once, no powers, products, or quotients raised to powers, and fractions are reduced. Okay? Any questions on that? All right. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the product of powers. So product means multiplication, and powers means I've got an exponent. So if I have a squared times a cubed, that's like I have a times a, that's my a squared, and a cubed is a times a times a, right? So a times a times a times a times a, how many a's do I have? 5, so it would be a to the 5th. If I have 3 squared times 3 to the 5th, that's 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. And so now I have 7 of them all together. It's 3 to the 7th. So it's important that you realize that you only combine them if you have the same bases, okay? You need to make sure you have the same bases. Also, if there's no exponent, you need to assume it's a 1. So for instance, if I have x times x cubed, that's really x to the 1st power, okay? And so that's going to equal x, and then times the x cubed. So it actually comes out to x to the 4th. So don't forget that if there's no exponent, it's actually, there really is one. We just don't write it down. It's number 1. Okay, any questions about that? All right, so we're going to look at some examples. So for my first example, I've got 2 to the 4th times 3 to the 4th times 2 to the negative 2 times 3 squared. All right, so first of all, I have a negative exponent right here. So he's not happy. That one's going to have to move to the bottom. So on top, I've got 2 to the 4th. So that's 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. And then I've got 3 to the 4th. So 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. And then I've got 3 squared. So another 2 3s. And then on the bottom, I have 2 times 2. Because of my 2 to the squared that got moved to the bottom. So I can cross out what's the same on the top and the bottom. And then I just have to see how many of each that I have. There's nothing left on the bottom, so I don't need to worry about it anymore. 2 times 2, I've got 2 2s, so that's 2 squared. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 3s, so 3 to the 6th. And that would be your answer. Okay, and so when the exponents are that large, I'm not going to expect you to actually multiply out, figure out what 3 to the 6th is, and 2 squared, and then multiply them together. If they're smaller numbers, though, like if this was 2 squared times 3 squared or whatever, you can do that. That's 4 times 9. Okay, so when they're small exponents, they're going to probably want you to simplify them all the way. But if it's larger exponents, you can leave it as exponents. Okay, so got another one for your notes before we do a whiteboard problem. All right, so on this one, I've got q to the 3rd. So that's q times q times q. And then times r squared, so r times times q to the 6th. q, 3, 4, 5, 6. So all together, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 q's. So it's going to be q to the 9th. And then I just have the 2 r's, so r squared. Okay. You guys ready to try one on your own? All right, so on your whiteboards, we've got x to the 4th times y times x to the negative 2. All right, so we've got x to the 4th on top and a y on top, and then we had to move the x squared to the bottom, and so we have 2 x's on the bottom. So if you cross out what's the same, we're left with x squared y. And it looked like most of you had that. You got it. Good job, Ronnie. Okay, one more for your notes. Oops. All right, now I have n cubed n to the negative 4 times n. All right, so n to the negative 4 isn't happy. That's going to have to go to the bottom. So on top, I've got n times n times n. And then this is n to the 1st, so I have one more. And on the bottom, I've also got 4 n's. So if everything cancels out, what does it equal? What's n divided by n? What's 5 divided by 5? It's 1, okay? So be careful on that. Don't, if everything cancels out, don't think that it's 0. It's just going to equal 1, okay? No, because n to the 1st is different than just 1. All the n's canceled out. There's no n's left. So it's just the number 1. Okay? All right, next thing we're going to look at is raising a power to a power. So what I mean by that is if I have, suppose I have a cubed in parentheses, and then I'm raising that to the second power. Well, that's the same as doing a cubed times itself twice. And of course, a cubed is a times a times a, and then a times a times a. So now I have a total of 6 a's, so it would be a to the 6th. So for example, if I have 5 squared raised to the 4th power, that means I'm doing 5 squared times itself how many times? 4 times. So 5 squared times 5 squared times 5 squared times 5 squared. And of course, each of those 5 squareds is 2 5s. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it equals 5 to the 8th. Yes? You can, but if you get mixed up about what you're supposed to do, you should write it out the long way. So there are shortcuts you guys can take, but if you get mixed up about whether I'm supposed to add or multiply or what, you should write it out the long way so you get it right. Okay? Okay. All right. On B, I've got 4 cubed to the 0 power. Well, 4 cubed is 64. And that's being raised to the 0 power. What's anything to the 0 power? 1. So that one would just equal 1. All right, so on your whiteboards, I'm going to have you guys do this one. Okay, so that was just x to the 4th times itself 3 times. So 4 plus 4 plus 4, you have a total of 12. So x to the 12th. All right, this one's for your notes. We've got x cubed to the negative 5 times x to the 4th. So this one is being raised to a negative power, so that one has to actually move to the bottom. So I've got 1 over x cubed to the 5th power times x to the 4th. And you can write it over 1 if that helps you see it better. So on top, I've got 4 x's. On the bottom, I've got x cubed 5 times, so 15 of them, right? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yep, I did it right. Okay. All right, so I've got 4 that I can cross out. If I cross everything out on top, what do I have to leave behind? A 1. So I've got 1 on top, and how many x's were on the bottom? 11. So it's x to 1 over x to the 11th. Okay? So again, if you can figure out some shortcuts, I'm okay with you using them. But if you want to be sure you get it right, go ahead and write it out the long way, and then you won't have a problem, okay? All right, so on your whiteboards, I'm going to have you do that one. Okay, so some of you are getting close, but not quite. If I have t to the negative 2, that's 1 over t squared, right? And that's being raised to the 4th power, and then t cubed over 1 if you want to think of it that way. So that means I've got t cubed on top, and I've got t squared 4 times on the bottom. So 1, 2, 3 on top. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So I can cross out 3 of them, to be 1 over t to the 5th. All right, and then finally we have a product raised to a power. So that means I've got a product inside my parentheses being raised to a power. And so that's just AB times itself 3 times. But of course, I can count up how many A's I have, which is 3 of them, and how many B's I have is 3 of them. So it would equal A cubed, B cubed. And even though we don't have a quotient raised to a power, I think some of the homework problems might have a quotient. So just to show you that real quickly, suppose I had x over y to the 4th power. That would be x over y times x over y times x over y times x over y. And so it would be x to the 4th over y to the 4th. So you treat a quotient similar to a product, okay? So for example, if I have a negative sign on the outside of my parentheses, remember that's a -1. And then 2y squared means I'm doing 2y twice. And so -1 times 2 times 2 gives me -4, and then y times y would give me y squared. So -4y squared would be the final answer for that one. So on your whiteboards, I would like you to do 5g to the 3rd power. And multiply it all the way out. Okay, so that's 5g times 5g times 5g. 5 times 5 times 5 was what? 125. And then we have g cubed. All right, so for example B, now my negative sign is inside the parentheses. That means that's part of my base. So I've got -2y times -2y times -2y. So -2 times -2 times -2 is -8, and then we have y cubed. So remember, when the negative sign's in the parentheses, it's part of the base. Okay, and then another example for your notes here. I've got x to the 6th times y to the -3 inside the parentheses, and then the whole thing is squared. So first of all, I'm going to take care of that negative exponent. I know that that wants to be moved down. Rodney, what are you doing? Could you just wait till class is over, please? Thank you. All right, so we've got x to the 6th over y cubed, and that's being squared. So that's x to the 6th over y cubed times x to the 6th over y cubed. So I've got 6 plus 6, I've got 12 x's on top, 3 plus 3, I have 6 y's on the bottom. And again, if you get mixed up about whether you're adding or multiplying, write it out. If that helps you see it, then it's better to write it out and get the answer right. Okay? All right, any questions? All right, that's it then.